오리진입니다. 오리진 디스커버리 투어. 자, 이번에 누구로 하지? 자, 이번엔 관병으로 하면 보죠. 관병. 다 지났고요. 다 끝났고 이제 일상생활 남았습니다. 일상생활. 자, 오시리스 최초의 미라. 이거 어딘데? 시원해.
Welcome to Osiris, the first mummy. The oldest mummies recovered date from the Old Kingdom, though Egyptologists believe that mummification was in use much earlier than that. At first, the body was mummified through environmental desiccation, by leveraging the dryness of the environment and the heat of the climate. Early experimentations in mummification were conducted with the use of resin made from tree sap. Strips of linen were only used on some superficial parts of the epidermis of the hands or jaw. Ideologically, the will to preserve the body is not explained in any way until 3600 BCE. This is when the Egyptian belief that the body housed the soul was finally documented for modern Egyptologists to eventually decipher. It was not until the arrival of the myth of Osiris in the Egyptian religion around the 5th dynasty that mummification was thoroughly conceptualized. The practice was thereafter grounded in both a mythological and ideological point of view. Osiris was mainly known as the god of the dead and the god of resurrection. The most well-known Genesis myth concerning Osiris is that of his dismemberment. It is Plutarch who gives the most simplified and complete summary of the story. Within Egyptian mythology, Osiris represented the first king to rule Egypt. Jealous of his power, his brother Seth attempted to usurp his throne. After several unsuccessful attempts, Seth succeeded in killing his brother by dismembering him and scattering the pieces of his body all over Egypt. Isis, the great of magic, traveled all over Egypt in search of the pieces of her husband's body. After a long search, she recovered all the pieces save for his manhood, as it was eaten by a fish.
사실 생식기가 제일 중요할지도 모르는데.
Isis then reassembled the body of her husband by binding it together with strips of linen. Aided by her sister Nephthys, another powerful magician, they gave Osiris the breath of life. This not only brought him back from the dead, but also allowed him to recover his virility long enough to impregnate Isis. thus ensuring his succession before, once more, dying. Thus Horus was born.
호루스는 오시리스의 자식이군요.
The ritual used to bring Osiris back to life essentially depicts how he became the first mummy. It is why, on the sarcophagi of kings, we often find Isis and Nephthys represented as the magicians who restore life to the deceased.
심오하군. 제벤 고대 이집트의 미라입니다.
Welcome to Mummies. The mummification process used by ancient Egyptians was highly ceremonial in nature. The different types of mummification took into account the social level and richness of the deceased and even included animals. The most expensive was that reserved for the pharaoh and the royal family, as well as some of the wealthiest members
고증에
of the
맞는
court.
거였군요.
The first step was cleaning. Once bodies arrived at the mummification site, they were placed on inclined tables while the bodily fluids drained away. They were then cleansed by priests until they were deemed ready for the purification process.
신관들이 일종의 장의사 역할을 하는구나.
The purification of the body began with a libation from sacred water. The priest then fumigated the body with terebinth resin. After the ritual cleansing, priests used oils, spices, and all kinds of essences to further purify the body of the deceased. Finally, all body hair was meticulously removed. Once the body was properly purified, embalmers removed the organs, following very specific procedures. First, the brain was extracted by inserting a spoon through the nostril to break the ethmoid bone. Then, using a spatula, the pieces of the brain were removed as thoroughly as possible. What matter remained was extracted after a process of liquefaction, achieved through the use of a caustic liquid. The cranial box, once emptied, was rinsed and disinfected with palm wine, and then stuffed with strips of linen cloth and liquefied resin.
이건 좀 끔찍하네요.
After taking care of the brain, embalmers made an incision on the left flank and carefully set aside the viscera. The inside of the body was also rinsed with palm wine. Then the embalmers filled the belly with pure myrrh, cinnamon, and other perfumes and sewed it shut. The removed viscera were washed in palm wine and packed in crushed herbs before being placed in canopic jars. Canopic jars were placed close to the sarcophagus or kept in a chest nearby. At first, the viscera were wrapped in tissue and placed in the vases. As the ritual requirements became more elaborate, ointments, spices, and even water and natron were added to the process. Towards the middle of the New Kingdom, canopic jars assumed the appearance of the four sons of Horus. They were known as the protectors of the
이게
viscera.
장기가
These
담겨
protectors
있는
had their own guardians,
단지군요.
each a goddess of the dead.
그러니까 지금 관점으로 오자면
Imseti, the human-headed god, protected the liver and was protected by the goddess Iset.
3000년 된 장기들이네.
Hapi, the baboon-headed god, protected the lungs and was protected by the goddess Nephthys. Dumut-Ef, the jackal-headed god, protected the stomach and was protected by the goddess Neith. And finally, Kebesenuef, the falcon-headed god, protected the intestines and was protected by the goddess Selket.
양파도 나중에 저렇게 만들어 버릴까?
Natron is a naturally occurring mineral found in evaporite.
양파 싫어?
These sedimentary rocks are made up of mineral salts and were generally mined from lake beds in Egypt.
이건 일종의 소금입니다. 소금.
Embalmers used natron as a desiccant
나트론이
to dry the
소금이에요.
flesh and stop the corpse's putrefaction process. Once the body was cleansed and eviscerated, the deceased was covered in natron for about 40 days. Once desiccated, the body was prepared to be wrapped in strips of linen. Once the body was fully desiccated by the natron treatment, embalmers oiled, painted, and sometimes even added hair extensions or a wig. They often used a henna-based antiseptic preparation to give the body a more colorful and lively appearance while preparing it to resist molds and fungi. Next came the phase which gave mummies their most well-known appearance, the wrapping.
그래서 보통
Originally,
미라들이
each part of the body was wrapped separately.
만화 같은
Men had
데서
their
이제
arms crossed on
붕대를
their
감고 있는
chests,
모습으로
while
표현이
women
되죠.
had the right arm folded over their breasts and the left arm stretched along the body. However, techniques evolved over time. Eventually, the body as a whole was wrapped with limbs alongside the body, and increasingly sophisticated and different techniques of weaving flax bands were developed.
만약에 미라가 진짜로
In
붕대를 그렇게
addition to the
무한으로
jewelry and
쓸 수
amulets
있었으면
arranged on
아마
the skin of the deceased,
새로운
amulets were
에너지의
also carefully inserted into the weaving of the linen
기원 같은 걸로
strips.
되게
Each amulet was
각광받지
linked to a
않았을까?
myth or to an ideological belief related
상생하는
to
거지 뭐.
rebirth.
이건 부적이군요. 이거는.
Masks were an important part of a mummy's finery. Early wooden funeral coverings were very expensive, however, and soon replaced by masks created through a technique known as cartonnage. Masks fashioned with this method were created by laying several layers of linen or papyrus pulp
저기
on a
보이네요.
base made of mud or straw. Cartonnage was used for more than funerary masks. Ornaments and the animal coffins of the late period were also made in such a fashion. Cartonnage evolved to cover the entire body of the mummy during the 22nd dynasty. The mummies were placed on a
안녕하세요.
board inside a rigid envelope of cartonnage, which was laced at the back with a string. Extremely cost-effective and visually pleasing, this technique was very popular through all layers of the society. Cartonnage envelopes were usually covered with inscriptions and polychrome decorations, specifying the names and titles of the deceased, scenes depicting daily life, or decorations specific to the funerary world.
아침 먹었음?
This was a true gift for Egyptologists eager to study the funerary rites of the ancient Egyptians. Once the mummy was properly wrapped and adorned, the embalmers proceeded with the ceremony of the opening of the mouth. A vital step
징겠다고요?
of the funerary process, this ceremony was meant to bring back to life the deceased themselves, or an object representing the deceased. There were no less than 75 different stages for the opening of the mouth. It required the application of the same oils, ointments, spices, and perfumes used during the mummification process. Makeup was sometimes part of the process as well.
시체 화장시키는 거네. 그죠?
The last stage of this long ritual was the act of touching the mouth with the adze to symbolically allow the breath of life to infuse an inert body. Its performance was reserved for a very specific set of people. Priests who wore the mask of the god Anubis, a close relative of the
중간에 제 입고 있는 거
family,
양파
or
사촌
by the
가족이.
heir to the throne.
자, 미라 제작 과정에 관한 이야기였습니다. 이번 미라의 중요성.
Welcome to the importance of mummies. The first hieroglyph for embalmer appeared in pyramid texts of the Old Kingdom. It is likely that embalming was a trade that progressed alongside the evolution of ancient Egyptian funeral practices. While we still know nothing of how embalming came to be a profession, we do know that embalmers had a hierarchy, and that each embalmer specialized in a specific phase of the mummification process. The mummification techniques were jealously guarded by embalmers from generation to generation. Despite their efforts, Herodotus and Diodorus discovered their methods in late antiquity, but historians were skeptical about the validity of the texts. It remained a mystery until two teams of modern medical legal scientists confirmed the process in 1994 and again
2011년에야
in
과정을
2011.
확실히 알았나 보네요. 생각보다 얼마 안 됐네.
The Uabet, meaning the pure place, was where the embalmers mummified the bodies of the deceased. Until the end of the Middle Kingdom, it was located in tents at the edges of the city due to the smell of decomposition. In the New Kingdom, however, the Uabet was located within the city limits, though still in open-air spaces. In the same way that the practices and techniques of mummification evolved, so possibly did consideration towards embalmers within ancient Egyptian society. The pharaoh had access to the most elaborate of mummification rituals. The richer citizens of Egypt also enjoyed complex embalming options, though none of them allowed for the removal of the brain or viscera. After purifying the body, embalmers injected a liquid through the rectum, sealed it, and allowed the mixture to settle. They then plunged the body into natron for up to 40 days. Once the body was dried, the seal was removed, and the entrails flowed out with the injected liquid, leaving the skin and bones of the deceased to be wrapped in linen and returned to the family for burial.
일종의 염하는 사람들이네.
The least costly embalming option was for the embalmers to simply inject a product called surmaya and immerse the body in the natron for up to 40 days before handing it over to the family. For all those who could not
저
afford
하얀
any
게
embalming
나트론인데
process, desert burials offered a pauper's alternative to
나트론이라는
preserve the
게
bodies of the
소금
dead.
같은 거예요. 소금. 그러니까 시체를 말리기 위한 소금 같은 거예요. 지금도 왜 그 물기 빼려고 왜 소금 두거나 그러잖아요.
Egyptian civilization has always appealed to Westerners, even before the Greek and Roman invasions. As early as the Middle Ages, mummies discovered by travelers were often sent back to Europe. Curio cabinets, dating from the 16th and 17th centuries, usually included pharaonic artifacts in their collections. The Egyptomania phenomenon was heralded by Napoleon Bonaparte's Egyptian campaign, which lasted from 1798 to 1802. The following years were marked by a resurgence of interest from rich enthusiasts and scholars who exposed Egypt to the general populace. Many research societies focusing on Egyptology were founded during those years. By 1868, mass tourism began in Egypt under the
본인의
aegis
트라우마를
of the
꺼내지
Cook
마세요.
Agency. The rich would indulge in leisure trips to Egypt and
미라를
bring back
가지고 왔다고요?
mummies. Upon their return, they would organize evenings that consisted of unpacking mummies and removing strips of linen and amulets layer by layer.
미친놈들이네
These
이거.
were considered the shining cultural events of the season. The Egyptian collections of many a museum were founded as a consequence of this mass pillaging.
미라를 갖고 와서 집으로 돌아간 뒤에는 사람들을 저녁에 초대해서 암아프하고 부적을 벗겨내요. 정신병자들이구만 이거. 그러니까 유럽 새끼들이.
Thanks to those dubious parties, the fantasy of a mummy coming back to life, seeking revenge on its defilers,
그래서
was
아마
born.
미라 같은 영화가 나왔겠죠.
The mummy malediction myth
이모탭.
has remained steady in popular culture ever since, particularly in written media and cinema.
씨발, 자기들도 그 알프레드 대왕 같은 새끼들. 아유, 알프레드 대왕 같은 새끼들 그러면 안 되지. 알프레드 대왕 같은 놈들 그 시체 건져가지고 옷 벗기고 그러면 개지랄 할 거면서 왜 남의 나라한텐 그래. 이건 부적입니다. 부적. 주술입니다. 주술.
Welcome to Amulets and Rituals. Ancient Egyptians believed the world was a chaotic place, filled with supernatural forces. They knew that art and words gave life and power to things. Carved with images from
와제트의
hieroglyphs
눈이랍니다.
or in
와제트의
the
눈.
shapes of gods, amulets were highly personal objects that warded off dangers and disease while attracting success. Some amulets
아줌마들 하고
were
다니는 목주 같은
temporary,
거죠.
intended to solve a specific problem, while others were meant to be worn forever into the afterlife.
예나 지금이나 비슷해.
Priests would infuse amulets with magical energy during religious ceremonies, imbuing them with protective magic to safeguard against supernatural powers. The wealthiest of Egyptians could obtain a divinely ordained pendant in which was hidden a magic formula inscribed on a piece of
양파.
papyrus. It would act as a unique spell tailored to the owner.
너도 죽은 다음에 그렇게 할까? 미라 어떤? 별로 들을 가치가 없나 보다.
Religion was so important to ancient Egyptians that it permeated every aspect of their daily lives. Since water was the source of life and had the symbolism of purifying the body and the soul, all daily routines began with ablutions. Personal prayers to the gods were sometimes written or spoken, with family prayers passed down through generations. There was a complete calendar of each of the religious days, both good and bad, illustrating the appropriate daily rituals.
고양이 미라도요.
Along with
양파
wine,
친구들인
milk, and
것 같네요.
ointments, offerings to the gods consisted of small amulets to life-size statues and family shrines.
양파도 언젠가 저렇게
During the
만들어서
Greco-Roman period,
보존해 놓을까?
offerings to the
아니면
gods consisted of mummified animals, cats for Bastet, dogs for Anubis, and birds for Thoth.
언제가 양파가 자기 연장을 써서 이제 자기를 미라로 만들어 달라 그러면 이렇게 만들어서 보존해 주는 것도 괜찮은 것 같아요. 뭐 화장해 달라 그러면 화장해 줘야지. 어쨌건 자기 의사가 제일 중요한 거 아니겠어요, 그죠?
Deemed messengers of the gods, oracles offered guidance and judgment for all Egyptians, regardless of status. Crucial advice was offered on everything from day-to-day
양파
farming
대담하네요.
management
양파는 매장
to a
당하고 싶은가
pharaoh's
봐.
decision on whether to start a war. Oracles were often used to
영천에
decide
선산
legal
있는데
issues.
거기다가
If the
묻어줘야겠어.
accused refused the judgment of the god, another god could be consulted in hopes of a more favorable reply. It was oracles that guided the Greek sailor Batos to the coast of Libya, where he founded a colony known as Cyrene. During Alexander the Great's campaign to conquer Persia, he consulted the oracle at the Temple of Amun within the oasis of Siwa, and was subsequently ordained a divine being.
자, 부적과 의식 엄청 많네. 자, 고대 이집트의 신전과 의식. 죽었는데 보면 뭐예요? 죽었는데 보면 뭐해? 살아있을 때 잘해줘야지.
Welcome to temples and
죽은 다음엔 그 다음에
During
삶이 있겠지.
rituals and festivals, the god was carried on a solar barge between the areas of a temple or the temples of different cities. Funerary carvings and paintings covering thousands of years, as well as the Book of the Dead, depict the same ship and oar design. Solar barges have been uncovered near or within several pharaohs' tombs. They were intended to carry the pharaoh into the afterlife.
태양의 뱀입니다. 태양의 뱀.
Ancient Egyptians believed that Ra, the sun god, traveled the skies in a boat known as the solar barge. The solar barge was believed to cross over to mythological lands.
그건 네 환상이겠지 이건.
The god Ra believed mankind was conspiring against him. He ordered Sekhmet, the lion-headed war goddess, to kill all humans.
양파의 신이다.
To his chagrin, Ra quickly realized that with all humans gone, there would be no one left to worship him. In order to stop the rampaging Sekhmet, beer was brewed and dyed red with pomegranate juice to resemble blood. Sekhmet drank every drop of the brew she could find, eventually passing out drunk. When she awoke, she was calmer, and her lion visage had changed into Bastet. The festival of drunkenness was celebrated in honor of that
이거는
myth.
26왕조랍니다. 26왕조. 그때 유물이랍니다.
Unlike the daily rituals that took place in the temple and were performed by priests, festivals allowed the entire population of the city to participate. Festivals helped mark the passing of the seasons in the agricultural calendar. In reflecting the cycles of life,
1왕조부터
festivals offered a sense of
1왕조가
consistency
이집트가
and
통일된
structure for the regular
지구거든요.
citizens, thus reinforcing the sense of
1왕조부터
order
뭐
that
30몇
pharaohs were to
왕조인가까지 있을걸?
provide for the citizens of Egypt as part of their godly duties.
양파도 저런 짓 많이 했을 거야. 이제
The
내가 못되게
importance of
굴면
these festivals is demonstrated by their
날 없애버리고
longevity.
싶다가도
Records show that Osiris
생각해보면은 자기
festivals
그 밥
occurred for
주고
more
물
than
주고 할 사람이
2,000
없어지니까
years.
아마 참고
Some
살았을 거야.
festivals serve to reinforce state control and promote the king's reign. Both the Opet and Sed Jubilee festivals were specifically intended to celebrate the renewal of the king's power. The temple hierarchy consisted of high priests, several types of priests, scribes, and servants. The high priest was known as the prophet. Some divinities had up to 4 prophets, and they were the ones to perform the most advanced and complex rituals. Egyptian priests were not confined to solely religious tasks, and in fact had
여성부
crucial roles in
5급 공무원
Egypt's
정도 되면 이
administration,
정도 석상에도
most of
성욕을
which
느낄 수 있을
served to
것 같아.
reaffirm the pharaoh as the proper vessel for the gods.
걔들은 좀 문제가 있지.
Their focus within the temple was centered on the proper conduct of
이것도
daily divine
19금으로 맡길 수도
rituals,
있겠네요. 잘하면.
rather than as custodians of dogma or the indoctrination of individuals. Scribes were custodians of the sacred sciences. Some priests were associated with the funeral rites and were considered the group with medical knowledge. The servants of the Ka were low-ranking priests who carried food and offerings in funerary rituals. Lector priests were distinguished by their ability to read, and their main duty was to recite specialized religious texts in both temple and funerary rituals. Priests and all the officials who served the temple worked only 3 months a year, with each period separated by a quarter of inactivity, at least within the temple compound.
신전 안에만
Each
있었구나.
outgoing group handed over the temple and their tools to the newcomers. Only the high priesthood remained in permanent office within the temple. The most sacred part of the temple was referred to as Jesser Jesseru, the Holy of Holies. The most sacred inner sanctuary was where the shrine to the temple deity was located. Only priests were allowed within. Offerings were given, and rituals unseen by even the pharaoh were performed.
근데
While the
고양이들하고
team
개들하고
chose to
만났을 때
allow
이거
any
심심하진 않았을
character
거야. 아마.
access to this space in some game temples, normally it was reserved for priests alone.
여기도 원래 이 방안은 원래 이제 신관들만 갈 수 있는 방인가 보네요.
Pharaohs and their priests often chose the site of these sacred temples because of some mythological
아, 진짜 고양이
connection
개.
or an alignment with the cardinal points and certain stars. Once
영원 말고
selected,
진짜.
a foundation ritual was performed. The pharaoh was required to complete 10 steps in the ritual, which required a mix of offerings as well as specific construction techniques. Once the temple was complete, construction of the chamber containing the shrine, or naos, began. The naos was where the god statue stood. The representation of the deity was usually in stone or wood and decorated with gold, silver, and precious stones. Smaller temples
저
had only one
정도면
naos, while larger
고양이가 원래
complexes
신성한
such as the
동물이었거든.
Temple of Karnak had many
이집트에서.
chambers to honor gods, such as Amun, Ptah, and Osiris.
저
Each
정도
statue was believed to be a
동상이면
receptacle
여성부
for the
사급 공무원
presence
정도면
or essence of the
성욕을
god's
느낄 수
Ka,
있겠네요. 저것도
enabling
검열
it to
대상이
take a
들어가겠죠 아마.
physical form. Through the statue, the god
당신들.
came to the shrine to eat, drink, and communicate with the pharaoh, or with the priests standing in for the pharaoh.
자, 고대 이집트의 신전과 의식이었습니다. 이번에는 신전과 신관. 지금까지 신관 얘기했던 거 아닌가? 좀 더 상세하게 들어가나 봐요.
Welcome to Temples and Priests. From its foundation, the city of Memphis favored worship of the god Ptah. The main
저
temple
높은
of Ptah was
성벽이
known as
어쩌면 여성부
Ptah,
공무원들을
meaning palace of the
흥분시킬지도
Ka
모르겠네요.
of Ptah. The name of the temple, translated into Greek as Aegyptos, would eventually evolve into the modern name Egypt.
걔들이 흥분하는 건 왜 그런지 모르겠더라.
Temples
아무
were
이유
the
없이
center of
흥분하더라니까.
religious, political, and economic life in ancient Egypt. These sacred places were viewed as the literal home of the gods and goddesses. As such, every aspect of them, required care and reverence, all of which was accomplished through elaborate ritual.
어디고? 일론가?
Located in the center of Memphis, the Temple of Ptah was the most prominent and imposing building in the city.
멤피스가
The
프톨레메우스
long
왕조가
walkway
생기기
leading toward
전까지
the temple, known as the
이집트의
Dromos, was guarded by rows
중심도시였습니다.
of sphinxes.
중심도시, 북부의 중심도시는
The entire sacred area
멤피스고요.
was designed to
남부의
keep the statue of the
중심도시는
god
테베죠.
protected, deep within the sacred enclosures that surrounded it. The Dromos opened into a courtyard, with the surrounding portico graced with columns carved to resemble palm trees. During special festivals, the general population was allowed to enter
신전
this
안으로
location,
오는
but under no
일반적으로
circumstances would they be allowed into the sacred
못 들어왔나
spaces
보네요.
beyond the courtyard.
사람들이 신관들만 왔다 갔다 할 수 있었던 모양이고, 게임에서는 지금 보면은 저도 마음대로 들어갈 수 있고 그리고 사람들도 마음대로 들어갈 수 있는데 원래는 못 들어가는 곳인 것 같아요. 저 나무 기둥들을 보면은 공무원들이 흥분할 것 같으니까 빨리 지나갑시다.
The Memphis Alabaster Sphinx was discovered in 1912, almost completely buried in water and sand. 8 meters in height and weighing in at roughly 90 tons, it is still mounted on its original pedestal.
높이 8m 엄청
Though it is
엄청 큰
called
거네.
the Alabaster Sphinx, it was in fact carved from common calcite rock, which is similar in appearance and texture to alabaster.
그렇게 안 커 보이는데 왜 높이가 8m지?
Erosion has destroyed the original engravings, making it difficult to determine when it was created.
저게 기원전
Egyptologists believe that its
1400년대쯤에
facial likeness resembles
유물이랍니다.
Amenhotep II, and so it could have been sculpted somewhere between
가서 오면
1700
안다고요?
and 1400 BCE.
형준 씨는 키가
It is believed
존나
that this
작으니까 아마
monument once stood outside of the temple
8m가
of
아니라
Ptah
20m 정도로
and was
보이겠죠.
integrated
체감상.
into subsequent extensions to the complex. The size of the imposing sculpture reflects the importance it had to the temple during the New Kingdom. This Sphinx is one of the few remaining artifacts from the ruins of
여기
Memphis
기원전
to survive.
600년쯤입니다. 600년쯤. 나무들 때문에 그 여성부 공무원들이 흥분할 것 같아. 빨리 갑시다.
In Egyptian culture, some animals were associated with gods, while others were considered to be living gods. The Apis bull was believed to be a divine entity. The earliest mention of the Apis bull in ancient Egypt goes back as far as the
손에요,
first
소.
Egyptian dynasty.
아피스 황소라는데?
Originally the symbol of fertility, the Apis bull was linked to the god Ra, with the image of the sun carried between its horns. Later it was associated with Osiris, the ruler of the underworld.
여기 말기
thus
왕조라는데
becoming
말기
the
왕조가
funerary
뭘지 징한지
divinity
모르겠다.
Osiris. During the 18th
1왕조 이전
dynasty in
시기를 말기
Memphis,
왕조라 그러나?
the Apis bull's association with the city's deity earned it the title Herald of Ptah. The Apis bull was so revered that even Alexander the Great, upon his arrival in Memphis, gave honor to Apis.
요즘 같으면은 그 신교 놈들이 저건 씨발 이교도의 우상이다 그지라면서 파괴하고 그러겠죠. 병신들.
The
옛날엔
Apis
구교가
bull
그랬는데
lived with its harem in a sacred barn
요즘은
located in
가톨릭은
an
안 그러고
enclosure in the temple
요즘은
of Ptah.
개신교 놈들이 그러죠.
Each bull bore 29 signs representative of its divinity. Among them, the bull had an eagle-shaped mark on its back, a double tail hair,
이것도 말기
and a
왕조랍니다. 말기
scarab-shaped
왕조.
mark under the tongue. The signs were intended to
찾아볼까?
correspond with the lunar cycle. After its death, Egyptians would search for its reincarnated form among the livestock.
이집트 말기 왕조라는 게요. 1왕조 이전 시기가 아니라 1왕조 이전 시기는 선왕조, 원왕조, 초기왕조 이렇게 이제 부르고, 말기왕조라는 게 알렉산드로스하고 그다음 아케메네스 페르시아에 점령당하기 직전 왕조를 말기왕조라 부르는 모양이네. 그러니까 이집트인들만의 고유의 마지막 왕조들이라는 의미 같아요. 왕조?
Like other
26개인가
living
그런 것 같은데.
divinities, the mortal incarnation of the Apis bull was prayed to, and when it died,
왕조가 총
it was given a
30개쯤 되는 것
luxurious
같아요.
funeral,
30개. 이집트
which
고유 왕조는
included
31개고
until the reign of Ramses II.
페르시아하고 좀
the Apis
겹치긴
bulls were
하지만
buried in
26개에서
individual
31개쯤
graves in
되고,
Saqqara.
그 이후에는
During the 26th dynasty, the
프톨레마이오스
bodies of the
왕조가
bulls were
만들어지는
buried
거죠.
in enormous stone
알렉산드로스한테
vats in the
점령당했다가.
underground corridors of the Serapeum of Memphis.
한 4,000년 정도 해먹었지. 6,000년, 4,000년? 길게 보면 6,000년쯤일까? 아무튼 우리 때부터 지금부터 클레오파트라가 살았던 시기까지보다 클레오파트라 때부터 옛날 피라미드가 만들어졌던 시기까지가 훨씬 더 길어요. 기원전 2700년, 3000년까지 올라가요, 걔들. 지금부터 4000년, 5000년 전인 거죠.
and to prevent chaos from entering Egypt. Details of the ceremonies found on temple walls provide a thorough overview of the stages of the daily ritual. Performed 3 times a day to mirror human meal times, each step of the highly symbolic ceremony was accompanied by specific recitations, many of which referred to mythical events.
이때 사람들이 너보다 똑똑했다는 생각은 안 해봤음?
The high priest would first awaken the sleeping god with a chant. Then the seals of the shrine's doors were broken and the bolts drawn back. The act of swinging open the doors was a symbolic gesture where sight was granted to the deity. The priest would then bow and kiss the ground. The god was then washed with incense-infused water and its mouth rinsed with mineral salts. The cleansing was followed by adorning the statue with jewels and royal garments. The final ritual required the priest to sweep away any footprints in order to prevent evil from approaching the god. Heredity was the primary source of new recruits. Rarely was an outsider allowed this position. At the top of the temple hierarchy was the high priest.
이 정도면 여성부
Each
9급
temple
공무원
dedicated to
정도면
a
성욕을
god
느낄 수 있을
had at least
정도의
one high priest
조각상입니다.
devoted to
그러니까
its
조심해야
care
됨.
and service. During the Ptolemaic dynasty, one family held the position of high priest in Memphis
그
for
4,000년
almost
전엔 여성부가 없었으니까
300
저런 걸
years.
만들었겠지 아마.
High priest candidates made their way up the ranks of the temple hierarchy.
그런다니까 병신들이.
The one chosen to occupy the lofty position of high priest
내가 괜히 이런 말
was
하겠어요?
usually confirmed by the pharaoh. Several of the high priests were also important officials in the government. Families sharing the highest priesthood titles tended to make many alliances.
보는
thereby
너희들은
gaining more
괜찮겠지만은
land
나
and
같은
wealth.
나같이 올리는 사람들은
Shifting
가끔 그런 게 나오면
balances of power
식겁한다니까.
sometimes resulted in more or less open conflicts between the priesthood and the pharaohs. In the 21st dynasty, Thebes became the
요게
capital of an
21왕조
almost
때랍니다.
entirely
21왕조 때.
theocratic government. The city was headed by king priests who spoke and governed in the name of the god Amun, in open opposition to the ruling pharaohs. These king priests caused a massive decentralization of power, known as the Third Intermediate Period.
지방 분권기라는 거는요, 그 중앙 정부가 작살났다는 의미예요. 그냥 지방 분권이라기보다는 그냥 각지의 토우들이 난립해 있다, 뭐 그런 얘기라고 생각하시면 되겠어요.
The educational institution in ancient Egypt was known as
Oh.
the House of Life. Attended by the offspring of
이
the elite
정도면
and the clergy,
여성부
it
6급
was a
공무원
place
정도면은
tailored to the
흥분할 수 있는
social
정도네요.
status of its attendees. The earliest references to this type of institution date back to royal
아무튼
decrees
조심해야
of the
됩니다.
Old Kingdom.
여성분은 언제 어디서 흥분할지 모르기 때문에.
Only 2 known centers have been uncovered, one in the abandoned city of Akhetaten, and one at the temple of Ramses II on the west bank of Thebes. Inscriptions uncovered in those locations mention the names and titles of people who were connected with the House of Life, such as a chief physician and many scribes. It is presumed that by the late kingdom, every temple had a House of Life.
생명의 집. 병원 역할도 하고 뭐 그런 모양이다.
The House of Life offered training for the elite, destined for occupations such as astronomers, doctors, veterinarians, diplomats, architects,
교육기관이구나.
translators, or theologians. Some institutions focused on specific disciplines, making them a central hub for the country.
일종의 대학 같은 건가 보네. 작은 대학.
Not limited to instruction for young students, the House of Life was a source of reference for many scholars, with rooms dedicated to papyri of many disciplines. Because papyri were preserved there, the Greco-Romans referred to the House of Life as a library. Ancient Egyptian economy was based on an unequal system of redistribution of goods. The state of Egypt collected the crops, and the temples distributed them throughout the provinces. Since the only people capable of counting and ensuring a fair redistribution were the educated scribes, this meant that the temples played a pivotal role in this process.
신전들이 지방 통치기구군요.
There are records of pharaohs
지방관의
making
역할을
offerings of
대행했다고 할 수도
large
있겠네.
tracts of land and animals to temples in order to maintain their favor. Ramses III offered generous gifts to the temple of Amun in Karnak in such a manner. Palaces, warehouses, and granaries were built inside the temple compound to better control the redistribution of goods. The size of the recorded numbers of goods, combined with every other function filled by temples, only serves to confirm their might as economic, religious, and political centers of power within Egypt.
이거는 테베 지역에 있는 곡물지장구랍니다. 이집트 남부죠. 심오하구만. 자, 이번엔 건설입니다. 건설.
Welcome to Building Ancient Egypt. Constructed with bricks made of mud, most ancient Egyptian buildings were not permanent. Only religious temples and funerary monuments were meant to stand the ravages of time. For these very important structures, Egyptians used limestone, sandstone, and harder materials, such as granite, quartzite, and travertine. These heavy stone blocks were so prized that they were often transported from quarries located hundreds of kilometers away. Limestone was common and easy to extract from quarries on the east bank of the Nile. This particular limestone had marine fossils in it, however, preventing it from being easily decorated and polished. Used as the main building material, the structure would then be finished with a finer limestone that was polished smooth and decorated as needed. Limestone was used for the building of the first pyramids and for most of the religious buildings of the Old and Middle Kingdoms. Ancient Egyptians preferred to use sedimentary rock beds or layers like sandstone and limestone because they were often easier to extract. The common method used to extract stone was the open pit quarry. Stonecutters would find quality stone, shape, and dig it out on site. Open pit quarries enabled many workers to work simultaneously on many blocks, which allowed for better productivity. Workers would draw a large grid directly on the stone's surface, taking care to leave a space between the blocks. This allowed them to isolate the different blocks and create a trench that would make the extraction easier. Stoneworkers used iron chisels for hard rock and bronze or copper tools for softer rocks such as limestone. Removing material between each block created a trench line. In some quarries, that trench was wide enough to accommodate a worker, who would then cut the block entirely on site. For harder rocks like granite, workers cut a series of holes and hammered wooden wedges into them. They then soaked the wood until it swelled and caused the rock to split. The gallery extraction technique was used when the desired rock was buried under layers of rubble. This method was often necessary in order to find the whiter and finer limestone required for a smoother finish.
대단하네.
The first step was for the stoneworkers to create an access pit that would allow them to reach the desired wall of stone. Once a wall of quality stone was exposed, workers could then cut out smaller blocks. This pit required a descending platform. Designed like a stairway, it allowed them to free multiple galleries of blocks. To cut the stone, they created a longitudinal kerf or slit, and then cut the rock at a 90-degree angle. The lower side was determined along the geological layers or by using a horizontal cut. Wooden wedges were inserted in the rock and hammered in. Shock waves were then generated using hammers, fracturing the blocks at the seam. To maintain the stability of these mining pits over the course of quarrying, workers would leave support sections of unexcavated rock.
요즘 버팀대인가 보네요. 기둥이죠, 자연기둥.
In every quarry, dedicated shrines were established to offer protection for the workers. In particular, Serket, the scorpion goddess, was considered a very powerful deity among quarry workers. Every mine and quarry of ancient Egypt included a scorpion charmer who was said to use magical powers to ward off the dangerous insects and keep the workers safe.
자, 건설, 이벤 노동 및 운송, 노동자 및 운송. 돌을 캐스면 옮겨야죠.
Welcome to... Whether workers were employed for the pyramid construction or at the quarries, the government supplied food and housing. Workers for the pyramids and royal necropolises were housed in more permanent villages, such as the famous Deir el-Medina. Quarry workers had more temporary lodgings. All skill levels were needed and utilized, from basic work hands to prepare the gypsum, to brickmakers and sand carriers, to skilled stonemasons to shape the blocks. Skilled architects and engineers were employed year-round, while support labor were often farmers who worked on the quarries or construction during the Nile's flood season. The basic laborers were hardworking and versatile. Many may have been farmers who joined the construction during the off-season. Hieroglyphs found in the work villages listed assigned job titles. Archaeological research shows that no food was stored or prepared on site, but instead workers received abundant rations of bread, beer, and meat. These rations were taken care of by an administration outside the village. Medical treatment was also available for
노예
those who
아니에요.
were
지금 보면
injured.
알겠지만 노동자들이에요 그냥. 지금 건설로조 사람들하고 비슷한 노동자라니까. 전문 인력은 계속 일을
While some
하고
quarries were close
때에
to the
따라서
Nile,
예를 들면
others
일을
were
못하게
located
되는
across the desert and
왜
required
나일강이
long
범람해서 일을
expeditions.
못하게 되는 농부들이나 그런 사람들
These
와가지고
expeditions were
일을
sanctioned by the
돕고
state.
그랬다는 거야.
They
그렇게
involved
하면서
complex logistics
그
and
살
required
곳도
many
마련해주고
participants.
밥도 주고 그다음 맥주도 주고
Transporting a
그랬다는 거지.
block by land meant that workers had to overcome the weight
옛날엔
and
잘
friction of the
몰랐으니까
load.
그냥 비하라기보단 그냥
To
잘
solve
몰랐으니까
this,
노예라
they first
그랬겠지.
dug a track in the
자기들이
ground.
그런 식으로 했으니까.
This path was sometimes reinforced with rails upon which a sled, used to ferry the blocks, would be pulled.
요게 썰매네요. 그 돌을 끌어가는.
Whenever possible, blocks were toppled from a higher elevation onto the sled. Workers then poured water onto the clay at the front of the sled, creating a slick surface to more easily move the load. It wasn't until the New Kingdom that animals were used to tow the burden. During flood season, the Nile was at its largest and deepest, which allowed the transportation of the heaviest and biggest loads. Quarries close to the river had troughs dug out to deliver the stones to the shoreline. Harbors and wharfs situated at the river's edge allowed the transfer of materials and supplies. Harbor warehouses accommodated additional stocks of stone so that they were available for the winter sailing season.
가끔 배를 이용하기도 하고. 진짜 물 뿌리는 게 여합산에 물 뿌리는 게 이제 좀 더 끌기 쉽게 하려고 일부러 그런다고 하죠.
The Uwadi el-Jarf papyri detail a limestone load intended for the Khufu pyramid that weighed in at 70 to 80 tons, or 30 blocks. One papyrus is a fragment from a foreman's notes, taken while working on the Great Pyramid. It details the transportation of limestone blocks from the Tura quarries to the construction site of the pyramid. The other papyri are shipping logs containing archives of the sailors assigned to sail the Red Sea and the Nile. Stone cargo generally weighed 15 tons per boat, amounting to roughly 6 or 7 blocks per trip. For heavier loads such as obelisks, monolithic pillars, or gigantic statues, larger boats were used. These transports are the ones typically showcased on temple walls. River transportation was the most efficient way to ferry stone blocks between the quarry and the construction site. Blocks were transported by flotillas of several types of boats. The most detailed illustration of transport by river is a relief of Queen Hatshepsut's barge with an accompanying flotilla.
자, 노동자 및 운송이었습니다. 이번 농업입니다. 농업.
Welcome to Agriculture and Seasons. While crops were cultivated in different oases around the desert, most of the arable lands were near the Nile. Two types of cereal grain were cultivated, barley and an ancient wheat known as emmer. These two key ingredients contributed in establishing bread and beer as the staple of the Egyptian diet and the basis of its economy. The Ptolemaic era created an agricultural revolution with the introduction of advanced agricultural techniques and new grain types such as rice, durum wheat, and pearl millet. The resulting agricultural mass production greatly increased the economy of ancient Egypt. It also prompted the development of storage and transportation, allowing long-distance trade with other regions.
원래는 밀하고 그 다음에 아까 뭐였죠? 아무튼 그것만 지었는데 농사 보리하고만 지었는데 나중에 프톨레마이오스 왕조 시대에 들어와서 쌀하고 다른 곡물들이 들어오면서 이제 많이 성장했다 뭐 그런 말이네.
Both bread and beer rations were part of a system of barter payment. The state used those goods to pay wages for those who worked in the quarries and at the construction sites. Beer was so important to ancient Egyptians, they had a goddess of beer brewing, Tenenet. Tenenet is seen in many paintings and sculptures with beer, and women are depicted as the primary beer makers. In order to increase agricultural production, fertile land was divided into plots and large agricultural villages were encouraged.
우경이네.
The state and temples were the biggest landowners. Depending on the region, fertile land was managed by civil servants or rented to individuals. Ancient Egyptians relied on rudimentary tools for land cultivation. Soil was broken down with hoes, and wing plows were used to make furrows. The three seasons known as Akhet, Peret, and Shemu corresponded to a specific phase of the agricultural
요게
process
절기입니다,
and the
절기.
river's natural changes.
농사짓는 절기죠.
Akhet was the time of the flood, beginning with the appearance of the star Sirius in July. Peret was the time when lands were cultivated, plowed, and sown. This fell between October and November. Shemu ran from May to September and was when harvesting and taxation began. The pharaoh's duty was to uphold order against chaos and provide for his people. Priests and local governors also wanted to appear as protectors of the people. However, any variation in the Nile's seasons could cause water shortages. This had devastating consequences on wheat and barley crops. The pharaoh, administrators, and priests knew they needed to demonstrate their ability to prevent such a catastrophe from happening. And so they invented the story, which would be inscribed upon the famine stela.
그러니까 이 농지들이 대부분 다 사유지라기보다는 국가가 그걸 국가 소유나 아니면 신전 소유의 것이었고, 그거를 지방에 있는 신전들이 구획을 나누어서 사람들을 관리하고 그리고 농사 짓게 하고 뭐 그랬다는 것 같네. 그죠?
The story begins with the pharaoh worried for his people. The Nile hasn't flooded in years, and his people are starving. In search of the origins of the flooding, Djoser seeks out Khnum, the protector god of the region and the source of the drought. Djoser gives the god offerings and orders his priests to restore the temple of Khnum. These offerings please the god, and the floods are restored. This story was intended to highlight the importance of the deity in everyone's daily lives, while also demonstrating the crucial role that the priests and the king played in feeding and protecting the people of Egypt.
자, 농업과 계절이었습니다.
Welcome to ancient Egyptian cultivation. The new grain types of the Ptolemaic period required a great deal of water. Farmers needed to ensure they had effective, consistent irrigation. The Nile's rising and receding waters naturally irrigated most of the crops. Areas where the Nile didn't reach, such as gardens and vegetable plots, required an irrigation tool known as the shadoof. The shadoof allowed easy transport of water from its source. It consisted of a tall wooden frame with a long pivoting pole and suspended bucket. The system could be raised and lowered with little effort. Later, a sakya, or water wheel, was invented. The sakya needed animals to turn the wheel, which rotated buckets through the water.
물레방아구나.
It drew the water to an elevation of 3.5 meters and enabled a great deal of control over the irrigation process.
일종의 펌프네, 펌프.
This improvement supplied larger areas and thus resulted in larger harvests. The threshing process separated the grain from its husk. Workers would spread the ears on clean ground. Oxen, cows, or donkeys were then guided back and forth to trample the grain. This continuous movement worked the grain loose while preventing the animals from eating it. Unwanted chaff and straw were swept away, or gathered and added to the mud used to make bricks, to make them stronger. Winnowing was the stage where workers used wooden scoops to throw ears in the air. The wind carried off the chaff, leaving the heavier seeds to fall to the ground.
키질이구나.
This action was repeated until the undesired materials were sifted out. Grain waste was mixed with manure or other organic substances to produce brick-shaped dung loaves that could be easily burned. A standardized brick size enabled Egyptians to mass produce this byproduct and use it as a commodity. Transporting large amounts of grain required ships equipped to carry heavy loads. These goods were moved during the Nile's flooding season, when the river was deep enough for large ships. The transports stopped at checkpoints to accommodate customs and police controls, as well as for technical requirements and weather conditions. Having reached Alexandria's inner harbor, The wheat was unloaded under the supervision of a civil servant in charge of wheat management. Portions were distributed to Alexandria's city market, and the remaining stockpile was either exported or stored in warehouses. Grain storage facilities were located across all of Egypt. Temples and institutions had large silos, while individual houses had storage sheds. In some houses, arched cellars were built into the foundations. These watertight chambers were accessible from the ground floor through a trapdoor. Royal granaries acted as the storehouse and distribution centers, and managed state payments to civil servants, soldiers, and the police. Though plastered on the inside, silos weren't completely sealed, and so remained susceptible to mice infestations. When the grain was ready for processing, it was poured into bowls and pounded into a coarse flour. That flour was then passed through a sieve to make it of finer quality and further ground between stones. Ancient Egyptians did not stock flour. Instead, fresh grain was portioned out each time to produce flour as it was needed. The sieves used by ancient Egyptians were unable to filter out sand and stones. Grit often passed into the flour, causing long-term tooth abrasions among all classes of Egyptians.
돌을 못 걸렀구나. 자, 고대 이집트의 가축입니다. 가축.
Welcome to Domesticated Animals of Ancient Egypt. Agriculture and domesticated livestock were introduced 6,000 years ago. Archaeologists have found traces of cattle,
헬리아드.
donkeys, pigs, and dogs. Dromedary are thought to have been
요거
introduced during
지금
the
요 게임
Persian
배경보단
invasion.
400년 전 이야기. 400년쯤 전 이야기겠다. 4,500년 전이급. 4,500년 전일 걸 아마.
Pets were deeply cherished in ancient Egypt. Many illustrations of children often include a pet in the depiction.
고양이 조각상이래 이게. 요게 신왕국대입니다. 신왕국대. 애완동물. 양파의 선조격 되네요. 장난이다.
One of ancient Egypt's most iconic animals, the cat, wasn't adopted into their daily life until the Middle Kingdom. Since they were so highly capable of killing snakes and rodents, cats were present throughout every period. However, they only became pets sometime during the Middle Kingdom. Prince Thutmose, son of Amenhotep III, had his cat Ta-Mew laid to rest in its own sarcophagi.
산채로 묻은 거야? 고양이에요, 고양이.
The earliest reference to dogs dates back to 5000
이건
BCE.
개네요, 개.
They were popular pets as they helped hunters and protected herds. They were closely linked to Anubis, the jackal-headed god. Baboons, monkeys, and even falcons were tamed as pets. Each was mummified and buried with as much ceremony as any family member.
자, 가축, 양파. 이번엔 의학입니다, 의학. 그냥 이거 프톨레마이오스 왕조 병사예요. 로마 병사 아니야?
Welcome to ancient Egyptian medicine. Evidence of advanced medical procedures have been found on mummies, and ancient Egyptians left detailed medical writings from diagnosis to follow-up treatment. One of the oldest known surgical studies is the Edwin Smith papyrus. It's one of the first documents in history that notes an association between the integrity of the brain and cognitive functions, including cases of ocular complications and paralysis following head trauma. Vinegar-treated marble stone from Memphis was used as an anesthetic.
죄송하세요.
Another similar document, the Ebers Medical Papyrus, is over 20 meters long and 30 centimeters wide. It details treatments of 48 surgical cases and contains 877 paragraphs describing various diseases. Alongside accurate and factual scientific approaches, the papyrus has more than 700 magic formulas and incantations to ward off demons and disease. This demonstrates how ancient
옛날엔
Egyptians
병이
believed
곧
in a
악마였으니까
harmonious balance between religion and
실용적인
science.
의학하고 종교학이 같이 있다는 게 이상하지 않겠죠. 지금도 가끔 그러잖아요.
Remedies were considered as medicine and carried by doctors and priests. Village doctors often had another job alongside their medical duties and the preparation of medicines. A cure for blindness was made of fermented honey, ochre, and coal. The science behind it was that honey functioned as an antiseptic and antibacterial, while ochre would reduce the swelling. All of their knowledge did not always suffice. Ramses II died of an infection caused by an abscessed tooth.
진료 방해위. 자, 고대 이집트의 가죽과 아마. 이건 옷인가 보다.
Welcome to Leather and Linen in Ancient Egypt. Tanning, a process which dates from prehistoric times, was present although not highly valued in Egypt due to the heat. Leather was reserved mainly for things such as sandals, leather bags, dagger sheaths, quivers, and other similar items. Leopard hides, unlike regular leather, were highly valued and usually worn by priests.
안녕하세요. 이제 곧 있으면 오리진이 다 끝나요. 행복합니다 지금.
Valued for its coolness and freshness in hot weather, linen was the fiber most commonly used for fabrics and textiles. It was produced from flax, which was plentiful in Egypt.
이제
Fibers
끝나는구나
were
싶어서.
usually dyed before weaving. While color was used in the production of textiles, dyes weren't commonly used for clothing, and most Egyptians wore white.
저도 아쉽긴
The
한데
color
충분히
represented
즐겁게 했기
spiritual
때문에
purity, a goal to reach for every day of one's mortal life.
후회하진 않습니다. 위쳐 이후로 이렇게 재밌게 본 적은 이렇게 게임을 재밌게 본 게 없는 것 같아요. 작년에 위쳐 한 이후로. 그렇지 뭐. 아무튼 끝은 해야 되니까 다음 걸 해야죠.
Various shades were achieved using woad, a dye produced from the leaves of Isotis tinctoria.
대청이라는
The
게
plant
염료입니다.
was
염료.
cultivated for this purpose
식물에서 내는
within the Nile
염료인데
Delta and allowed for the creation of various colors.
영국
For example,
놈들이 그걸
different
가지고 몸에
maceration
쳐발라서
times of the leaves would
이제
result in
와 우리
colors ranging
파랑이다
from
막
red
그렇게
to green,
상대한테 겁을 줬다는
while
그런 얘기가
adding in
있죠.
limestone shifted it to blue. During the Greco-Roman period,
근데
other
그 영국
ingredients were
킬트족이
found,
대청을
resulting in
몸에
a wider range of colors.
바를 때 땀 같은 게 나면 녹아내리니까 이 미친놈들이 말의 정액을 이용해서 몸에 붙였다는 그런 얘기가 있습니다. 접착제 역할을 했대요. 접착제.
This area's style is strongly influenced by the dye baths and tanneries of modern-day Fes in Morocco.
요게
This
실제로
helps
페즈에
Ubisoft
있는
envision what such
염색자인가
locations
보다.
might have been like in ancient Egypt.
2016년도 거래요.
While this tannery is within the city walls, back then they were often found outside the city boundaries. The tanner's trade was considered off-putting by the Greeks, as all these operations resulted in noxious smells.
자, 고대 이집트의 유행 복식. 아까는 옷감을 만드는 일이었고 이번엔 옷입니다. 옷. 엄청 힘들대요. 돈은 많이 번대요.
Welcome to Ancient Egyptian Fashions. Learning what life was like for ancient Egyptians presents many differences, and yet also surprising similarities to how people might live today. Understanding the daily lives of regular citizens so many thousands of years ago is ultimately what connects us as human beings. Jewelry was a popular item among ancient Egyptians of all social standing. Both men and women wore earrings, rings, and bracelets. Status determined how much jewelry a person wore and what it was made of. Common folk wore pearl necklaces, simple bracelets, and leather bangles. Brightly colored earthenware and glass paste were a favorite enhancement. The jewelry of the elite was made
힘들고
from
보람 없는
gold,
일이네, 그러면.
silver, and
힘들고
other
보람
precious
없는 일.
stones. Because gold never lost its shine, it was considered
여기
akin to the
18왕조
flesh
시기의
of the
유물이랍니다.
gods.
18왕조.
Wide jeweled collars were a favorite. Made with rows of beads formed into patterns of animals or flowers, the soft chiming sounds they made were thought to appease the gods. Though idealized, tomb paintings are a catalogue of the changing fashions of ancient Egypt
지금
from the
기계로
Old
하죠.
to the New Kingdom. Egyptians took appearance and cleanliness very seriously and were diligent about their fashion, hair, and jewelry as well as their grooming habits. The fabric of ancient Egyptian clothing was almost entirely made from various grades of linen. Linen was commonly white, draped over the body, and cinched at the waist, though some garments were sewn or tailored. Wealthy men wore long tunics, loincloths, or kilts, while poor men only wore loincloths. Women wore long dresses, with differences residing in the quality of the fabric, depending on social status. Egyptians commonly went barefoot, but could also wear sandals made from papyrus fiber or leather. Cosmetics, including concoctions to prevent body odor and bad breath, were an integral part of everyday life for Egyptians.
화장품.
Used by both men and women, cosmetics were used as moisturizing ointments and sun protection as much as for beautification. Red ochre, a natural clay, was the most readily available cosmetic to tint lips and cheeks. Henna was used on nails and lips, and as hair coloring. It was also favored by richer women to decorate their palms and the soles of their feet. Egyptians believed kohl had magical powers, wearing it as black eyeliner to protect their eyes from the sun and to prevent eye infections from particles in the flooded Nile River.
양파도 한 눈화장하죠.
A special green kohl, made from ground malachite, was worn for ceremonies and religious rituals. Women and teenage girls wore their hair long and often braided. Wealthier women included carved combs or hairpins. The length of men's hair rarely dropped past the shoulders. They were mostly clean-shaven during the dynastic period, a trend began by the elite and soon adopted by the general populace. Queen Hatshepsut donned an artificial beard when she became pharaoh. Wigs were very popular, used
가발.
for special occasions or to conceal gray hair or
가발은 뭘로
baldness.
만들었을까요?
They were fastened in place with beeswax. The most expensive wigs were made from human hair
사람의
and
머리.
reserved for royalty. Other wigs were composed of linen, wool, or animal hair. Prepubescent children generally had their heads shaved. Young girls kept some strands intact, while
그때도
young
그랬군요.
boys had a
지금도
braid
그러는데.
worn on the side.
복식. 이번엔 장인입니다. 장인.
Welcome to Art. It was under the watchful eye of Ptah of Memphis, the god of craft and architecture, that ancient Egyptians developed the unique rendition of the world they lived in. However, it is vital to understand that their view of art, and those who created it, was likely very dissimilar to the modern concept of the word. Instead of artists, the creative culture had skilled and respected artisans. The most significant categories of specialties for crafters were drawing, painting, sculpture, and metalworking.
누구요?
Ancient Egyptian craftspeople created both art and a wide variety of mundane, everyday tools. Every item created had a specific purpose and was produced by anonymous artisans who worked alone or with a team. Most crafts, such as pottery and metalworking, were utilized for everyday items. Luxury goods and artwork illustrations served temple rituals and were not meant for public display. Artisans rarely signed their names to the work, though they were clearly aware that they possessed a unique skill and talent for the task. Art, in all its forms, has offered not only a practical insight into the way ancient Egyptians lived, but in how they viewed the world and their place in it. The balance of order and chaos was crucial in both the physical and the metaphysical universes. As a result, their art appears to follow a strict set of stylistic conventions that supported this worldview. From households and palaces to temples and tombs, pottery, papyrus, and textile items were essential to the everyday life of ancient Egyptians. In ancient Egyptian culture, drawing was used as illustration,
사자
such as seen
표정
in the
좀 봐.
Book of the Dead. It was also the first step in the creation of a relief, painting, or statue. Two-dimensional representations were concerned with
여성부에서
order and form, and were
성욕을
intended
느낄
to
만한
honor
그런
gods and
장면들은
promote the transition
아까
of the soul
신전
to
얘기할
the
때 많이
afterlife.
나왔었어요. 그때 안 계셨어, 유감. 여성부 9급에서 4, 5급 정도가 느낄 성욕을 느낄 만한 그런
Stylistically,
조형물들이 많이
Egyptians
남았죠.
were
신전
concerned with
얘기할
the
때.
depiction of the human form's inner self. As
저 앞에 또
such,
보이네,
artistic representations were not concerned with realism, but rather with idealized youth and perfectly harmonious visuals.
강하게 부정하지 마시죠.
An
유명한 거예요, 저거?
exception to this were scenes depicting hunting and battle, where the environment and enemies moved in lively, even chaotic ways. Animals and foes were depicted piled up, as
다들
if
즐거워하는
describing
것 같은데.
chaos, with Egyptians standing in solemn, disciplined poses, bringing order to the scene. Reliefs could be either in high relief or low relief. Either method required a surface suited to the desired technique. Preparation of the surfaces differed depending on the quality of the rock. A quarried block only needed a simple smoothing. Rough-cut rock monuments, such as those found in tombs, required more work. Often the surface was coated in plaster before being sculpted. For reliefs, preliminary sketches were drawn in red, then framed with a red grid to position the elements of the scenes. Corrected sketches were in black, and once approved, the scene was ready to be carved. This method likely explains the name given to
제가
relief
손재주가
makers,
없어가지고
the
저런
one who
걸
draws
하나도
the
못하거든요.
outlines.
그림 그리는 것도 못하고 아무튼 손으로 하는 건 다 못하는데 보면 참 신기해요. 조각하고 그런 것도.
Statues were believed to be vessels for the souls of the deceased, or deities. That is why a sculptor was called the one who makes it live. This divine duty earned them the utmost respect. As with a relief, creation of a sculpture
표정들요?
began with a drawing. Most statues were made of quarried blocks of stone, primarily limestone, though sometimes harder stones such as quartzite were also used.
앞면은 거의 없는 것 같다. 앞면은 그림으로는 거의 없는 것 같아.
In ancient Egypt, the profession of crafter was organized and relied on a specific hierarchy. Most artisans depended on an institution to provide them with raw materials. There were 3 working levels for craftsmanship: domestic, large estates, and within palace and temple workshops. Some royal workshops, at their largest, covered an area of about 2.8 square kilometers in size. At the domestic level, most Egyptians were craftspeople to a greater or lesser extent. The ability to repair tools was a daily necessity. Crafted everyday items could also be bartered for at the local market. Artisans with skills but lacking in resources worked at large estates, where the elite provided them with space to work and raw materials. The most skilled artisans were employed in royal or temple projects and benefited from a special status. They were provided with good workspaces and considered to be highly skilled. An ancient text known as the Satires of Trades has a number of descriptive summaries
여기
that
19왕조
offer teasing
대파피루스랍니다.
glimpses into how artisans were perceived. A coppersmith was said to stink and have fingers that resembled crocodile droppings, while potters were said to be like those who lived in bogs. This view was likely exaggerated in order to highlight the most enviable
잘
position
만들었죠,
of all,
정말.
that of the scribe.
난 재미없을 줄 알았는데 처음 거 해보니까 괜찮아서 계속하고 있잖아.
Located near the Valley of the Kings, Deir al-Medina was a settlement created by order of the king to honor the most skilled artisans. Its name translates as the monastery of the city. Allocated a house on the initiative of the king, these craftsfolk were regarded with respect and referred to as the royal artisans. Those who lived there worked on the tombs in the Valley of the Kings and its surrounding temples. Archaeologists believe the site was home to skilled and respected artisans for over 400 years. It is considered one of the most important discoveries
장인들의 마을.
relating to Egyptian daily life.
기술자들이 모여 있는 마을이네.
While much of the focus of Egyptian archaeology was on its kings and queens,
오디세이에는
it wasn't
디스커버리
until the
투어가
excavation
없는
of
걸로
Deir
알고 있어요.
al-Medina that Egyptologists were given a valuable window into the community
아마
life
있었으면
of
제가 한번 들어봤을
ancient
텐데
Egyptian
저는 잘
artisans.
모름. 그러니까 그때 왜 신디케이트에 보면은 그 신디케이터 유니티에 보면은 왜 백과사전이라고 제가 마지막에 기록들을 한번 쭉 읽어보는 그런 시간이 있었잖아요. 그런 데 이제 넣는 거죠. 각 지역의 설명 아니면 유명한 건물들, 약소적 사건들 이런 걸 넣는데, 근데 그게 사람들이 그냥 안 읽고 넘어가니까 아예 그냥 디스커버리 투어라는 걸로 오리진에서는 만들어버린 것 같아요. 확실히 이게 전달력이 훨씬 높은 거죠. 왜 제 그 신디케이트나 유니티에서 낙수줍기라고 마지막에 영상 제목을 붙여가지고 올리는 게 있는데, 거기 보면은 데이터베이스들이 나와 있습니다. 게임 설정들도 거기 들어있고, 그 다음에 역사적 사건들도 거기 들어있고 그렇습니다. 좀 섞여 있어서 헷갈리긴 한데, 오디세이는 어떻게 된지 모르겠어요.
Welcome to... Excavations all over Egypt have uncovered enormous quantities of pottery vessels of all shapes and sizes. The production of pottery was mainly confined to the outskirts of settlements due to the materials required and to keep the kiln smoke away from inhabited spaces. The function of the product determined the selection of the raw material, its treatment, its form, as well as the finishing of the surface.
그리스예요, 그리스.
Pottery was essential to ancient Egyptians' daily lives. It was used
요거보다 한
in
400년
all
전쯤일
aspects of
거예요.
life, from the storage of grains and liquids to containers within the tombs of necropolises. The most common pottery was made from Nile silt that resulted in a reddish-brown clay. Limestone clay, which made for more attractive pottery, was only found in Upper Egypt.
이 그림이 또 유독 저렇게 젖꼭지를 섬세하게 묘사했을까? 다른 데는 안 그랬더니 또 트로이는
Early pots
모르겠습니다.
were made from pinched or coiled clay.
아무도 안 해봤으면 모름.
Chopped straw,
해봐야 알죠.
ashes, and other minerals were added, and the mixture was then smoothed and decorated before being put in the oven. Pots were fired in bonfires or enclosed within a brick kiln. The potter's wheel was
찾아보니까
utilized during the Old Kingdom. Pottery became smoother and more polished, similar to
그 그림
river
그린 사람의
stones.
욕망의 대상 아니었을까?
It was decorated primarily in
찾아보니까
red pigment, with the black color
오디세이는
achieved by exposing it to
이제
smoke.
파라오의 저주 같은 확장팩이 아직 안
Pottery
나왔대요.
workshops were attached to palaces or temples.
이번에
And
안 사길
around the
잘한
late
것 같아요.
period,
나중에 게임이
specialized
완성돼서
workshops began to appear.
컨텐츠들이 다 나오면 그때 사도 늦지 않을 것 같아.
Quartzite particles, which created the rich blue or
올해
green
나온다
glazing,
그러더라고요.
became common during the New Kingdom. Mediterranean motifs and tin-based glazing came with the Greco-Roman era. Potsherds could be found anywhere and were the most common canvas for
가마는
writing or
그때도
drawing,
가마처럼
in
생겼구나.
comparison to the more expensive papyrus sheets.
네네네.
Named after their Greek description, ostraca contained daily life records, letters, or could be drawn
처음
upon.
나온 최신 게임들
Artists
플레이하는
drew
거에 대해서는 어떻게
sketches for
생각하세요?
temples and tombs, or
저는
simply
그렇게
for
하지
leisure.
않는데 보통 방송하는 사람들은 왜 게임 새로 나오면은 바로 그걸 사가지고 하잖아요. 네네네네. 보통 방송하는 사람들이 그러잖아요. 제 맨 가정입니다. 가정. 콘솔로도 그거 나오잖아요. 콘솔로도 왜 최신 새로 게임들은 많이 나오잖아. 콘솔 독점으로도 많이 나오고.
Welcome to the Egyptian. In pre-Greco-Roman culture, women were considered equal to men in many matters. They owned property, testified in court,
저 여자는
could
웃고 있고
divorce
남자는
and
찡그러고 있는
inherit.
것 같은데.
Until the Greeks and Romans restricted their rights, Egyptian women could take over their deceased husband's trade. Marriage contracts included mentions of allowances and items of value brought to the marriage by the woman, which would forever belong to her. Certain professions were open only to women, such as weaving or professional
이거는
mourning, while others were available to both
이
genders,
정도면
including
여성부
working as servants for the rich
인턴
households.
정도라도 아마 흥분할 수 있을
Social
정도인 것
status
같아요.
did have an impact, though. The
좀
higher in
노골적이네.
status, the easier it was to obtain education and access different professions.
몇겹살.
Homes were generally composed of 3 rooms. First, there was the entrance, furnished with a small bench of brick, probably intended for a statue and protective divinity. Then there was the ceremonial room, meant to receive guests. The last room was either a
그 늙어서
bedroom or
그렇습니다.
kitchen.
늙어서.
Furniture
30대잖아요.
consisted of basic chairs, chests, and storage.
그전 30대가 관심
Tables
가질
were
만한
not
걸
used
보고
for
있는
family
거고
dinners.
가출소녀님은
Instead,
40대가
each individual had a small
관심
table of
가질
their
만한 걸
own.
보고 계신 겁니다. 둘 다 정상임. 30대라고요? 근데 왜 생각하는 건 40대 같음?
Marriages were a social contract rather than a religious construct. Family was vitally important to ancient Egyptians, and children were considered a blessing from the
초반과 중후반의
gods.
차이라고 하죠.
The father, mother, and their children were the nucleus of the family, and cohabitation sometimes extended to mothers-in-law,
하긴
sisters,
생각해보면
aunts,
그
and sisters-in-law.
게임 장면에서 여자 가슴이 가끔 나올 때가 있는데 그걸 포착해내는 건 저밖에 없었어. 다른 사람들은 아무도 그걸 못 보고 있더라고. 그건 내가 계속 그 가슴을 주시하고 있었다는 얘기도 되겠죠, 그죠? 시부레.
Status and wealth played a large role in the style and size of ancient Egyptian homes. Commoners' houses
뭐
were
그렇다고
built with
합시다.
sun-baked mud bricks. Wealthier homes were often painted in white and decorated with various motifs.
현관과 정원 모형. 저 땐 그래도 일조권 문제로 싸우진 않았겠네.
Town officials and the rich lived in mansions with numerous rooms that were luxuriously decorated. Only temples and tombs meant to last for all eternity were built with stone.
저게 끝인가 보다.
Funeral stone inscriptions focused on the main member of a household. Encircling this person would then be a spouse, parents, and children, possibly even siblings. These stones were so structured because there were no surnames in ancient Egyptian culture. Parents and children were a sort of family tree, which allowed for the identification of the deceased.
이게 불에 구워서 경화시킨 게 아니라는 거예요? 쟤들은 그럼 그게 아니라는 건가? 네. 이게 우리가 생각하는 일반적인 도자기하고는 좀 거리가 있다는 거죠. 물 새고 그렇다는 게. 알겠습니다. 자, 빵과 맥주. 여자 가슴에 관심 없는 30대 중후반의 역사 전공자분의 말씀이셨습니다.
Welcome to bread.
맥주는 지금도
While the
중요한데 뭐.
Mesopotamians invented beer, including using a straw to avoid the sediments and herbs,
아, 다르군요,
ancient
그게.
Egyptians perfected the brewing method.
쟤들은 그냥 흙이고
Egyptian beer's
우리
quality was
도자기는
determined
이제
by
흙이
alcohol
변해서
strength,
유리가 된
color,
거고.
and flavor. During the Pharaonic era, beer was the most commonly used and important alcoholic beverage. The state and temples used it, along with bread, as payment to workers, and it was included on the lists of food offerings to the gods and the deceased.
네.
Beer was the popular drink of ceremonies and festivals. The festival of drunkenness was even dedicated to it. Considered to be quite nutritional, beer was also significant in the day-to-day lives of ancient Egyptians.
표정이 좀 꼬름하다.
Egyptian adults and children consumed beer with all of their meals.
애들도
And
마셔요?
medical texts include hundreds of remedies that contain beer.
저때
It remained the most
맥주는
popular
우리나라
alcoholic beverage
마로준보다는
until the Roman era.
맛있었을까?
Recipes for beer
저는 맥주 별로 안
varied over
좋아합니다.
time
저는 그
and depended on the quality
맥주에
of the
탄산
materials.
들어있는 그게
Bakers and brewers typically worked
별로더라고요.
alongside one another at the
별로
same
맛이 없더라.
workshop or
맛있는 술이
house.
좋은데.
Many families often produce the quantity appropriate to their own
그래서
consumption,
리큐르 같은 거
with better
좋아합니다.
quality beers produced for festivals and other special occasions. The most basic recipe used malted cereal as the main ingredient. Fruits such as dates were added along with honey and spices. Once baked,
맥주도
bread would be
좋아하세요?
crumbled into the brew to start the fermentation process. Adding grain enzymes would break down the starches, turning them into
별로예요.
sugar and creating a thick mash.
근데 왜 드세요?
Once ready, the bread and grain mixture was compressed and then strained through a sieve with water into the mix of malt
왜요?
beer.
아까 어제 그 일 때문에?
Once fermented, the
주죠?
beer mash was transferred to large containers and again compressed by foot or with pestles. Once smooth, the beer was stored in pottery jars and sealed with a clay stopper. It probably couldn't be kept for long and likely had a thick, pasty appearance and texture.
걸쭉한 반죽 형태와
Very little
같은
was wasted.
식감.
Leftover grains were reused to make sourdough bread
되게
or
별로다.
combined with the next batch of beer.
저때 맥주는 별로 맛없었겠네. 네. 아, 그래요?
While there are many ancient accounts for making bread, most of the knowledge
빡쳐서
known about
드셨구만.
ancient Egyptian brewing comes from an account by the alchemist Zosimus over 300 years after Cleopatra's reign.
아우, 전 오늘 점심
More recently,
라면
Dr.
먹었는데.
Delwyn Samuel, an archaeobotanist, has proposed alternate antique techniques to brew beer. However, experts are unable to replicate an authentic beer since not all of the techniques and ingredients used by ancient Egyptians are known yet. Food was prepared on the floor until the Middle Kingdom, when cooking benches were introduced.
조리대라는 게 중간국
The
시대에
introduction of
있었다네.
durum wheat
그 이전까지는
improved
그냥
bread
바닥에서
quality,
했던 모양입니다.
meaning that the upper and middle classes ate better.
그러니까 아까
The
걸쭉하다
poor,
그랬잖아요.
however, still made do with a
맛있었을까?
diet consisting of a gruel made of vegetables, softened bread, or barley.
오늘 물처럼 마셨겠지.
Dough was kneaded by hand or foot, and when sufficiently blended, additional items were added, such as fruits, nuts, honey, and spices. To leaven the bread, they added sourdough or leaven from beer brewing. Ovens were circular or beehive shaped and made with clay or brick. If there was no oven at all, a bread maker used the hot sand to bake flatbread, a technique still in use by some Berbers today. Ancient Egyptians always had to fight off the omnipresent sand particles that were blown towards them. Despite their best efforts, sand regularly made its way into their food. Additionally, particles from the grain-grinding stone tools and ovens they used also contributed to attrition and prematurely worn teeth.
저 아저씨도 저 꼭지가
The team
좀
tried to
많이
portray
부각돼 있네.
this through toothache animations and commoners sweeping sand off.
그러니까 음식 만드는데 계속 모래가 그 들려드니까 모래가 이제 그 흘러드니까 그것 때문에 이빨도 안 좋아지고 그런 모양이다. 계속 섞여들 수밖에 없으니까. 야외에서 일을 했으니까 뭐 다 그랬겠죠. 쥐전. 세월과 경험이 속으로 나온 표현이다. 자, 고대 이집트의 포도주. 이번에는 맥주 말고 포도주입니다. 포도주.
Welcome to Wine in Ancient Egypt.
포도밭이네.
When the god Horus lost his eye in a war with Seth, the ancient Egyptians believed the eye turned into a vine, and the vine's
세트입니다,
tears
세트.
became wine. Early texts dating back to 3150 BCE contain the hieroglyph for vine. Regarded as extremely valuable, wine was highly sought after by the elite. It was also an essential part of many religious ceremonies. A millennia-old tradition. Grape cultivation and wine production was regimented in the way typical of ancient Egyptian
포도주라는
bureaucracy.
게 헬라에서 넘어온 게
Egyptians
아니었군요.
kept
이집트
careful records of
고유의
winemakers,
품종이 있으나 보네.
which they clearly identified on labels. Every landowner with a modicum of self-respect usually kept a vineyard. This held particularly true in the regions of the Fayum and the Nile Delta.
몽쉘 나야 저거는 뭐야? 니야 저건 뭐야? 너 누구냐? 아 그러니까 이제 포도가 원래 유럽에서 유명했으니까 난
Documentation shows
당연히 헬라에서 넘어갈 수
that
있을 줄
only
알았는데
certain
근데 이집트에도
craftsfolk
고유
were
품종이
allowed to
있다는 게
provide the containers
신기해서요.
required to
그럴
store
생각해 본
and
적 없거든.
transport wine. That and rigorous quality control checks established for every step of wine production shows that ancient Egyptians knew that the quality and longevity of wine could easily be affected by any number of variables, which they paid careful attention to. Egyptians had different kinds of wines, most of which ranged in quality from good to very good. The sweet shadé, to which honey had been added. The soft nejem, obtained by drying the grapes in the sun. The ma, reserved for religious ceremonies.
레스토랑이야?
And finally there was the peor, the mediocre rated wine, resulting from the second pressing of grapes and reserved for a less discerning palate.
자, 마지막입니다. 고대 이집트의 기름. 경북대 앞에 잭스펍이라는 술집이 있는데 근데 거기가 원래 이름이 네일아트 카페였어요. 네일아트 카페. 왜 네일아트 카페라고 지었는지 모르겠는데 손님들이 네일아트 카페에서 그러니까 술을 예를 들면 뭐 5만원 6만원치 먹고 갔다 그러면은 영수증에다가 찍히는 게 네일아트 카페에서 5, 6만원을
Welcome to Oil in Ancient Egypt.
경대 앞에 보면 잭스펍이라는 그 술집이 있어요. 근데 거기가
Castor,
원래 이름이
sesame, and moringa were the source
네일
of
아트
the most
카페였단
common
말이에요.
oils in ancient Egypt.
근데
Oil
거기서
was
이제 5,
used
6만
for
원어치를
various
먹고 가서
purposes. Cosmetics, medical
그 와이프한테
treatments,
그걸 보여주면
nutrition,
영수증을 보여주면은
perfume,
네일 아트
athletics,
카페에서
and
5, 6만 원을
rituals,
먹었다
to
그런
name a
식으로 이제
few.
보일 거 아니에요. 근데
The
술집
team
이름이 네일 아트
decided to
카페라고
use
생각을
oil
못했을 거기
as an
때문에
explosive to
그것
add more
때문에
gameplay
오해받는
opportunities for the player.
아저씨들이 좀 많았나 봐요. 그래서 그걸 이후로 이제 술집 이름을 잭스퍼비로 바꿨나 보더라고요. 왜 그 사장님이 네일 아트 카페라고 술집 이름을 지었는지 모르겠어요. 그거 괜찮은 데인데.
Ancient Egyptians originally used castor oil in wick lamps, but also for cosmetics, such as facial and hair treatments. There is mention in some papyrus of castor oil being prescribed to treat constipation and help pregnant women. Castor beans were found in ancient Egyptian tombs as early as 4000 BCE. Castor oil was made by pressing the beans from the plant of the same name.
변비 치료. 그래 뭐 그 기름을 먹으면 설사할 테니까 아마 변비 치료에 도움이 되겠지. 아, 목 갈 것 같다 지금. 목 상태 되게 안 좋네. 그저께부터 좀 갈까 말까 하더니
Olive trees were present though scarce in
자,
ancient
올리브입니다,
Egypt's
올리브.
early history, and olives were mostly imported from Syria and Palestine. Their use and cultivation remained uncommon until the mass
이거는
arrival of
외래종이구나.
Greek settlers during the reign of the Ptolemies, when demand increased sharply.
아,
Olive
윤내는
trees were
데서군요.
normally
그걸.
found in the region of the Fayum and the lands surrounding Alexandria.
손과 잠금 해제 고고학자. 자, 디스커버리 투어 모든 투어를 완료했습니다. 스토리 모드에서 흰 독수리 새누를 해제했습니다. 새누도 이제 하얗게 만들 수 있는 거야. 자, 이렇게 해서 디스커버리 투어를 모두 다 마쳤는데 사막 지역이 없는 게 좀 아쉽다. 사막도 뭐 있으면 좋을 텐데 재밌을 텐데 아마. 지금 보시면 알겠지만 이렇게 각 지역에 디스커버리 투어들이 쭉 있습니다. 그 지금 보신 것처럼 총 큰 분류는 5개고요. 하나는 이집트 전체 각 지형들에 대해서, 그다음 피라미드에 대해서 고고학적이나 아니면 그 유래나 아니면 상징적 의미에 대해서 알렉산드리아 자체에 대한 이야기, 그 다음에 이집트인들의 일상생활에 대한 이야기, 물론 파워섹스에 관한 이야기는 없었고요. 거기 있었어야 되는데, 그 다음에 로마에 대한 이야기는 키레네 쪽에서 간접적으로 많이 보여주고 있습니다. 그래서 각각 보시면 그 컨텐츠도 되게 풍성하고, 그리고 설명도 잘 돼 있고, 무엇보다도 시청각 자료가 확실하니까, 뭐 게임을 기반으로 쓰니까, 그죠? 확실하니까 보시면 아마 되게 도움이 될 거라고 생각합니다. 그 디스커버리 투어는 스탠드얼론으로 따로 팔기도 하니까 혹시 이제 애들한테 사람 죽이는 게임은 하기 싫고 시키기 싫고 그 이것만 시키고 싶다는 그런 분들은, 교육용으로만 쓰고 싶다는 분들은 이거 따로 사가지고 애들한테 보여주면 애들이 싫어하지 않을까 생각해봅니다. EBS는 아무리 재밌어도 EBS죠. 연대표도 있네. 보안국이 기원전 2600년이군요. 2700년쯤. 네, 다 찍었어요. 아까 고고학자라고 떴잖아. 왜 그래서. 자, 그렇습니다. 스탬프 투어도 끝냈고, 드디어 오리진이 끝났습니다. 드디어 오리진을 제가 91시간 했네요. 91시간 했습니다. 일주일 조금 넘는 시간 동안 했고, 디스커버리 투어까지 합해서 91시간 정도를 했는데, 위쳐 3 이후로 이렇게 재밌게 한 게임은 없었던 것 같고요. 자, 이걸로 끝입니다. 오디세이는 제가 갖고 있지 않기 때문에 아마 드래곤 에이지란다. 어쌔신 크리드 시리즈는 여기까지다라고 생각하시면 되겠습니다. 나중에 오디세이를 구하게 되면 다시 그때 플레이해보고, 1부터 크로니클즈를 제외하고 1부터 오리진까지 할 수 있는, PC로 할 수 있는 어쌔신 크리드 시리즈는 다 해봤는데, 확실히 그 게임을 오래 처만들다 보니까 이게 쌓이고 쌓이는 게 장난이 아니라는 게 많이 느껴지네요. 자, 다음 시간에 뵙겠습니다. 시청해주셔서 감사드리고, 제 방송 유튜브 달마시안TV에서 다시 보실 수 있습니다. 늘 시청해주신 가출소년님 감사드리고, 이 방송은 저와 정현씨가 각각 15,000원과 만원 출자해서 산 오리진 골드 에디션으로 플레이했습니다. 게임 조작은 룩시님이 선물해주신 엑스박스 패드로 했습니다. 방송 종료하겠습니다.